Good morning and welcome to our 8:15 to 9:15 session on vaping and e-cigarettes. My name is Jennifer DeGrees and I'm an eye care specialist with the East Baton Rouge Parish School System. I have the great honor of presenting to you today Dr. Lauren Tillery. Dr. Tillery received her doctorate of medicine from Louisiana State University School of Medicine, and she is currently one of the faculty members of Baton Rouge Family Medicine residency program. Dr. Tillery will focus on vast differences outlining e-delivery systems of nicotine. In addition, participants will learn more about devices along with physical dangers of e-cigarettes. Please place your comments and questions in the chat to be addressed at the end of this presentation. Also, remember to complete the evaluation immediately following this session to receive your certificate. Lastly, contact the eye care office if you have any questions regarding your certificate. So without further ado, I present to you Dr. Lauren Tillery.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name's Lauren Tillery. I am doing this talk really in conjunction with Dr. Gravois. He's one of our faculty members. And so I'm a resident at the Baton Rouge General Family Medicine Resident Program. And so I'm going to be doing my talk on vaping and e-cigarettes. I left a lot of time at the end for questions. So either feel free to interject, or if you want to save your comments for the end, we can do that as well. So without further ado, let's get started. First, I have no disclosures, no conflicts of interest or financial interest in the content of this presentation. And our learning objectives, we have a few. The first is to review the history of e-cigarettes, to know the difference between an electronic nicotine delivery system and conventional cigarettes, to be able to recognize e-cigarette devices and other forms of vaping devices and how they have evolved over time, to learn about and be able to discuss the dangers of e-cigarettes with students. So I just kind of wanted to start with this little video. It is an ad that was created by The Real Cost.
There's an epidemic spreading. Scientists say it can change your brain. It can release dangerous chemicals like formaldehyde into your bloodstream. It can expose your lungs to acrolein, which can cause irreversible damage. It's not a parasite, not a virus, not an infection. It's vaping.
And that was paid for by the USDA. They and we'll get into why they are starting to I guess have ads on vaping. So an introduction. I know the picture's kind of busy. We'll have a more pared down one in the next slide. The first successful e-cigarette entered the market in 2003 in Beijing, China. A pharmacist actually created it because he not only was he a heavy smoker, but his father also died of lung cancer. And so although there were many e-cigarette-like devices, this was the first successful one. And that was in 2003. It was really popular, so it entered into the US and European markets in 2006, 2007, originally designed to resemble conventional cigarettes and marketed as a smoking cessation tool. When it first arrived to the US, there were no long-term data about any of the health effects. However, it was thought, since there was no combustion, as in conventional cigarettes, that it would be safer. And so as time went on, there were studies, but when it was first introduced, there was nothing that we knew about it other than it could potentially be a safer way to smoke. So electronic nicotine delivery systems, not just e-cigarettes, there are also vapes, vaporizers, vape pens, hookah pens, electronic pipes, cigalikes, electronic hookahs, tank systems, all have the same components. It consists of a cartridge, an atomizer, and a battery. The cartridge has a liquid, and the liquid goes by a few different names, vape juice, e-liquid, and it has many different components, which we'll get into later. The atomizer is basically a vaporization chamber with a heating element. It's activated by inhaling or pressing a button. And what this does is it heats and aerosolizes the liquid in the cartridge to create a vapor. And when you inhale this vapor, it's called vaping. The reason the difference, or an alternative to allowing the atomizer to create the vapor, is to use the liquid and put it directly onto the atomizer. And this also creates a vapor, but it's a lot more concentrated than if you use it a traditional way. And so this slide, I just kind of go through the evolution of e-cigarettes. The first generation that was created was designed to mimic the shape and size of conventional cigarettes. It couldn't be recharged or refilled, and they were discarded as soon as they finished or completed, as soon as they used up the e-liquid and stopped producing vapor. The second generation was a little larger than a conventional cigarette, and it came in two sizes, medium-sized or large-sized, and both were rechargeable and refillable. The user could choose, what type of liquid they wanted to use. The third generation, they developed it more. It became more customizable. It was known as personalized vaporizers. And the same, not only could you choose the contents of the e-cigarette liquid, but now it also allowed you to customize the atomizer. And so with atomizers, depending on the strength, it could create a more or less concentrated vapor. And so then the fourth generation is where we are now. It's been increasing in popularity due to the small size. These are the pod mod devices. One of the most popular, I'm sure you've heard, is Juul. And so they're really small. They're small enough to be able to hide, use without being very obvious. And these contain replaceable cartridges that contain nicotine and flavorings. And so I just put this slide in to show you a few different types of devices. And as you can see, some of them closely resemble cigarettes, as well as pipes, cigars, and then others are clearly not, it clearly do not look like a cigarette. And so some of the later generations look like USB drives. And so it's a lot harder to then pick out, a vaping device. And this was from the US FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So moving on to the liquid components, I guess the first, the nicotine, this ranges it can range from none to 36 milligrams per milliliter. And just to kind of give you an idea, an average cigarette has about 10 to 12 milligrams of nicotine. And then when this is inhaled, you get about 1.1 to 1.8 milligrams. different people may inhale more deeply or have more puffs per cigarette. And so that kind of determines how much nicotine you get. So in a pack, you may inhale between 22 to 36 milligrams of nicotine. And so with the vaping liquid, common concentrations are 6, 12, 18, and 24 milligrams per milliliter. But as I mentioned, it can go up to 36 milligrams per milliliter. And then also to keep in mind, with some of the later generations that can customize the atomizer, this can also increase the amount of nicotine that's inhaled because, as I mentioned, a stronger atomizer will have a more concentrated vapor. In addition to the nicotine, there's also the propylene glycol or glycerol. These are used to dissolve the nicotine, the THC, the flavor, and then also to create a visible aerosol. And so some use it recreationally, you know, and they the big vapor, they try to do tricks and everything. And so certain types of solvents will create a better vapor than others. And so that's kind of where that goes in. Also flavorings. There are more than 15,000 flavors that are available, many of which are candy, fruit, soda, and alcohol flavors. In addition to the flavorings, there's metals, such as tin, lead, nickel, chromium, manganese, arsenic. This is thought to be due to the breakdown of the atomizer over time, and that mixes with the liquid and is then inhaled when a person vapes. And then there's also tobacco-specific nitrosamines, volatile organic compounds. There's also, you can customize it to include THC or cannabinoid oils. So next is prevalence of use. The vaping is the most commonly used tobacco product among the youth now. It was interesting and I guess sad, but based on data, the use has increased by 900% among U.S. middle and high school students between 2011 and 2015. This translates to about, later in 2017 and 2018, there were an additional 1.3 million students that started vaping. And this triggered some of the different associations to or take closer note on what was happening because it was the largest one-year increase of any substance tracked by the Monitoring the Future program in the past 44 years. And so people started to take note of this trend. And as we'll see, there are different things that have come about as a result of it. And so then in 2019, over 5 million children and adolescents were using e-cigarettes. And the prevalence of vaping cannabis also increased with the legalization of medical marijuana. And so in 2017, only 5% of 12th grade students were vaping. However, in 2019, it was up to 14%. And so I have a couple of charts. The first is the current tobacco product use among middle school students. And as you can see, it kind of stayed stable up until like 2017. And as we were saying, the increase from 17 to 18 was a lot higher than it has been. And that was before the year after that, when in 2018 to 19, it increased even more dramatically. And then the next slide is the high school students. And so you can see it's very similar to that of the middle school, where 17 to 18, there was a large spike in cases, and it continued to rise into 2019. And so when we look at the patterns of use, it's more common among some of the younger age groups, males and non-Hispanic white adults. It's usually non-daily users. In terms of adults, it's users of e-cigarettes they used to smoke, or they continue to smoke while vaping. And then they are using it as a smoking cessation tool or a way to reduce their risk of tobacco-related disease. But with adolescents, we see more of the flavoring is what has caused, or what we think has caused, the high spike in cases. And I also wanted to mention that there's also been a lot of children, like even younger than middle school and high school, that have not been vaping, but have been poisoned with the liquid that's in the house from, either the adult or teen in the house that's been vaping. And so that's also a danger that we have to be wary of. So moving on to adverse health effects. It's two main things that we think are causing some of the health effects with vaping: the vapor exposure and the nicotine exposure. With the vapor, many of the elements found in combustible cigarette smoke aren't found in e-cigarette vapor. However, there are still potentially toxic chemical substances that have been noted. And so something else to keep in mind is the cartridges aren't all regulated by the government, and so they can be filled with any variety of substance that a person can think of. There are some that are refilling their own vapes. There are some that are getting cartridges from illicit or black market places, and any of these substances that are there may increase the risk of harm when they're heated for inhalation. And so what's thought is the inhalation of the different microparticles and volatile chemicals causes irritation in the lungs and leads to lung injury. And so then, in addition to vapor, there's the nicotine exposure. And this really depends on the concentration of nicotine in the vaping liquid. We talked about it can be none up to 36. And then there's the different types of the different concentrations. So in addition to the concentration of the nicotine, we also have to take into account user experience, puffing intensity, and device characteristics. And so as I kind of alluded to earlier, if you look at how a vaping naive person smokes, they may not they may not inhale as deep, or they may puff more frequently. And then you compare that to someone who has been vaping for a while, and they may inhale more deeply and keep the vapor in their lungs longer before exhaling. And so it's been difficult to kind of pin down, I guess, how much nicotine individual users are exposed to. And so although it's marketed as a smoking cessation tool, vaping can actually cause higher exposures to nicotine than a conventional cigarette. And so this comes with all of the risk factors that we have found to be associated with nicotine exposure in conventional cigarettes. And so this kind of brings me to EVALI, which is e-cigarette or vaping associated lung injury. Previously in the talk, I said that, it came to e-cigarettes made it to the US in about 2006, 2007. Well, by 2012, there were a few isolated reports that people were saying may be due to vaping. And then years passed, and then in 2019, the Illinois Department of Public Health, as well as the Wisconsin Department of Health, began a joint public health investigation because there was a huge spike in the reports in clusters of cases of lung injuries. And one of the things that all of these cases had in common was recent use of vaping. And so they launched this this investigation. The first, 142 reported cases they published as pulmonary illness related to e-cigarette use in Illinois and Wisconsin, and they coined the term EVALI. And then the CDC then took that up and came up with a list of criteria for how for how they wanted the different hospitals and organizations to report these cases. And so as of February of 2020, there were 2,668 hospitalized EVALI cases reported to the CDC, with 68 deaths. And it's interesting because whenever they with these cases that are reported, we don't really know that this is the only cases that that were technically that may have fit into the CDC criteria, because most of the epidemiology was self-reported by the patients and or family. And so as I was saying, with where many people get their cartridges, sometimes they were obtained illegally. And so many people may not want to divulge, that yes, I was vaping, when if it contained certain products that were illegal in their state, may get them in trouble. And so this is what we have documented, but it is not necessarily the total number of cases and deaths that may be attributed to e-cigarettes.
We have one quick question, Dr. Tillery. I'm sorry to interrupt you. So someone asks on this specific topic, that's why I'm stopping you right now.
Sure.
What age groups are included in those clusters?
So the original clusters, and I'll go back. In terms of the original, July 2019, there weren't. It includes adults, and so it's not necessarily the middle and high school. In fact, they said it was young to young adults, like 20s and everything. And so the thought process is that these are this is when it became more popular, the 2018 to 2019, that's when it became a lot more popular to vape. And so with more people vaping, you have more incidents of EVALI or potential EVALI cases. And so I don't have, this percentage was this and this percentage was that. However, based on the study that was read, it just said young adults.
Thank you.
No problem. And yeah, feel free to stop me. I have my presentation up, so I can't see the chat at the same time. So I'm sorry if I'm.
No, you're perfectly fine, and I'll make
Okay.
sure I stop you. And she said thank you as well.
Okay, no problem. So long-term effects, as I mentioned, it's really difficult to say what the exact long-term effects will be or are, just because there are so many different variables. There's the liquid component, the device used, and then really the liquid component is a really big one, because depending on what is in the liquid, it may contain different levels of potentially toxic and carcinogenic compounds. And so that it may be less than in conventional cigarettes. However, they are still there. And then with conventional smoking, there's the respiratory and cardiovascular vascular we don't really know, but it's posed or thought to be less than in conventional cigarettes. And then it has been shown that certain that vaping can cause some changes in airway respiratory function, but it's not really known if it's to the same extent as with conventional cigarettes. So often we see, people with asthma or COPD that we attribute to the conventional cigarettes, and so you may not see as many people, but it's still possible that they're there. And then, of course, the risk of cancer is also likely to be lower, just because there's not necessarily the same concentration of particles or carcinogens that are causing negative effects on the lungs themselves. So vaping in teens. These were some of the main concerns that I found when I was reading about vaping in relation to, the middle and high school students. The first was nicotine dependence. With many other drugs, it's been thought to be a potential gateway effect. Studies have shown that that when compared to e-cigarette never users, the ones who have tried vaping have a higher probability of initiating cigarette smoking. And then something to keep in mind is that in youth and young adults, nicotine can harm brain development. And brain development continues until about age 25. And as we've shown, there's a significant amount of adolescents and young adults that have been that have started smoking way ahead of that age. And then the adverse effects, as we were talking about, EVALI, respiratory symptoms, and then potentially increased risk of COVID if used in conjunction with traditional cigarettes. And so I actually gave this talk as my grand rounds, and we kind of went into more detail about, COVID and everything. And I'll kind of briefly say something here. When it was studied, it was thought, that the e-cigarettes and the vaping cause lung irritation. And so this irritation can cause, if exposed to COVID, it can cause a more severe response, basically. And that people who have a history of vaping may have a more severe case than those who do not have the history of either conventional smoking or vaping. And so then the other thing is it normalizes smoking behavior. With conventional cigarettes, over the years, there's been all types of marketing that was done, and it basically made it seem as if smoking was harmless, or that, it was fine. And only recently, there's been, legislation to try to curtail a lot of that happening. And so, and I'll kind of go, my next slide is about legislation. But about 80% of individuals who start smoking during adolescence will continue to smoke into adulthood. And then a third of those will die prematurely due to smoking related disease. And so I thought that, statement was significant, because it used to be that, cigarette smoking was not as young, as vaping has been. And so if 80% who start smoking during adolescence, and then a third of them will die, well, now we have even younger kids vaping, because the thought is that, it's not as harmful as cigarettes. And so I'm concerned about, what this means in our future. If we have as many youth and adolescents smoking now, I can only imagine, what this will look like in the next 20 or 30 years. So legislation, 2009, a lot of the candy flavored tobacco was banned in the United States. However, if you think back, e-cigarettes didn't make it to the US until 2006, 2007. And so it was able to slip through the cracks of this ban. So although tobacco was banned for candy flavored, this did not apply to the e-cigarettes or any other types of tobacco products. Many municipalities in the US have local legislation, and basically this was created to kind of restrict the sale of flavored nicotine products. However, as we've been saying, a lot of the e-liquid that is used is not regulated by the government. Many times people are creating their own liquid, or getting it from the back in a random store, black market, illicit, illegal, And so the AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, has called for comprehensive bans on all flavoring agents in all tobacco products. And so that led to it last year, 2020, the FDA banned all cartridge-based nicotine vaporizers with fruit and mint flavors. So moving in the right direction. However, there does need to be more regulation on the availability of this e-liquid. So strategies, it really comes down to everyone has a role, from the healthcare providers to the teachers to the parents. In terms of the healthcare providers, we have to be more careful to not only screen for nicotine, but to also be more aware of certain terms that are used, because if we're not careful, we'll say, do you smoke? And when we say smoke, they may think, conventional cigarettes. And so they'll say no. However, if we say, do you vape or Juul or anything, then it may be a yes. And so that'll help us screen for and catch more that teens and adolescents and youth that are vaping and not just using conventional cigarettes. We also have to challenge their attitudes towards smoking. Of course, there's peer pressure, but there's also a lot of family that's involved. And this is where, parents and everything comes in, because if at home it's thought of as, oh, it's not as bad. And if they have a someone else telling them that, oh, you're basically it's just water vapor, then that's what they'll think, and they won't think anything of it. Their age, some of the younger children, adolescents, teens, they may not realize the ramifications of smoking, and so they're not really thinking about it, and they're thinking, I'm young, I'm healthy, I have nothing to worry about. Basically, marketing has also been something that can influence thought process, and that's something that they've been working on. Now they have all of the labels on everything. They have the videos, like the one that was at the beginning of the talk, that's being played just to try to get the word out about some of the misperceptions of vaping, in terms of it's not just water vapor, it's not safe. There is still the potential for lung injury. And so the attitude towards smoking is a very important predictor of smoking initiation, because if they think it's safe, if they think it's fine, then they're way more likely to start vaping than not. We have to encourage them to value good health. If you vape, it might limit how far you can run before you have to stop for breath. It might limit, it might cause different changes that may change your appearance or self-worth. We have to teach awareness of the media and peer influence, not just saying, peer pressure is there, but also to let them know, that even though you see it, or even though someone is telling you this, it may not be accurate. And then also the refusal skills. And so that's basically, if somebody comes to you and says, do you want to smoke or do you want to vape? Teaching them how to refuse and be more comfortable with refusing, instead of giving in to peer pressure. And so I kind of included this slide because there were a few different studies that showed the results of some of the school-based programs, and they found that these programs actually reduced smoking initiation by about 12%. And the most effective of the programs really focused on developing social competence and resisting social influences. So they were comprehensive, they were interactive, they started early, they address the more distal social and community influences as well. So part of this, through iCare, really, we did Tar Wars. And so I think that fit into this category where, we sit them down and basically go through, smoking is bad, basically. And we tell them why. We don't just say, don't smoke. We show them images. This past year, we weren't able to because of the pandemic, but in years past, we brought actual lungs to the classroom and let the students see them. We let them see some of the future effects of tobacco use, whether it's cancer or just looking at, the different types of cancer, I guess, from the dip versus, conventional cigarettes. And so all of those combined really, I think, fit into this idea of basically developing their ability to have a better idea of what it really entails to smoke. It's not just you're being cool, but this is really dangerous for you, basically. And these are the things that could happen if you do start smoking. And so there's also a prevention curriculum that I found to be school-based. It's called REAL. And it's basically refuse, explain, avoid, leave. And so honestly, it really, I feel it doesn't matter what exactly, like I wouldn't pick one particular intervention over another, but I do think that it has to be done. And that each school has to decide, how they want to go about bringing this topic to light, because a lot of this starts in school, right? So we have to be more aware and more proactive about getting to them while they're young, before it gets to the point to where now they're already smoking, and it's a lot harder to stop than it is to stop those who have already been smoking than it is to stop them from initiating smoking, or vaping for that matter, in the first place. And so that is the end of my talk. I am opening it up for questions.
We did have one question earlier, and that question was regarding how much nicotine was in the cigarettes. I think the person missed the actual amounts. So if you could maybe recap that amount. I know it was a large amount. Everyone was pretty amazed by that.
Yeah, sure. So let me get back to, so when I was going through everything, and I think I saw something in the chat. It said 6 to 12, and I found it to be a little higher. It's with the 10 to 12 milligrams of nicotine. And so what this, so I guess it really has been more regulated recently than it was in the past. And so the range probably was a lot higher before. However, with smoking, because there's been such an increase in the adverse effects from smoking, the Federal Drug Administration and a lot of the other I guess organizations have called for more, I guess, control of cigarettes and having them be, I guess, having it be less variable, right? And so we want to be able to say, this is the cause. We want to be able to do studies and research. However, if there's too much variability, then it would be more difficult to do some of these studies. And so that's what I have, that it's about 10 to 12 milligrams. And then this is just the nicotine in the cigarette itself. It doesn't include how much is actually being inhaled. And that goes into, like I was mentioning, how deep of an inhalation the person does when they're inhaling more versus, like short puffs. They'll have more nicotine exposure than just then they'll have more exposure than if they just kind of do 1 or 2 puffs and then throw it away. So although there's 10 to 12 milligrams of nicotine, you probably won't get all 12 milligrams when you inhale.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question is, does vaping or could vaping cause brain damage?
So this goes into the nicotine content and everything. And so with nicotine, the the nicotine itself has side effects, and part of the side effects is that in a developing brain, it causes changes in the reward pathways, and so I guess we can call that brain damage, but that's it hasn't really been studied, and so this is all postulated from what we know about like the nicotine from the conventional cigarettes. The more nicotine exposure there is, the higher the chance that there will be a change in the brain development, and so I guess theoretically it can, but as I've said, it's really difficult to say what exactly those changes will be, just because it hasn't been long since it's been in the United States itself. And then also, if we look for studies regarding brain development, I don't think that I've seen any specifically related to vaping, like when I was, doing my research.
We have another question. I had heard about popcorn lungs, which is a more immediate consequence of vaping compared to cancer. Can you elaborate on that?
So, um, so the popcorn lungs, it's really just, excuse me, it's a result of some of the different chemicals that your lungs are exposed to. And so different people can have a different reaction based on, like if they have a higher predisposition um, um, to certain, um, I guess, particles or chemicals. And so um, I guess what I would say is that um, each individual person, it's a risk that you take, that you are the one who will have like a reaction, and potentially, the popcorn lungs and all of the other different reactions your lungs will have. Basically, when you vape, you are inhaling who knows what concentration of particles. And then once these particles come into contact with your lungs, it can cause irritation. It can cause, different reactions that can lead to that. But I wouldn't, I can't say, whether or not it will happen every time or to everyone. It really just depends on, like certain people, like if you have an underlying lung disease in the first place, then your body probably can't fight off and react to some of the particles that it comes across. And so I guess those people may be at a higher risk for something to happen. And then others may not. Just with smoking, they have some people who smoke their whole life and die of some other related cause. And then they have others who they don't smoke, but they're around someone that does, and they're the ones that dies of lung cancer. So it really hasn't been studied much that I could say. They have studied, the effects of some of the particles on the lungs, and although it shows that there is a reaction, it hasn't been, definitively said that this happens every time versus, who it happens to.
We have a question. Where can we find information about the school-based intervention referred to in the last slide?
Perfect. So in my references, I talk about, I got, there are these different websites. One of the best ones, there's on the CDC website, there's, if you look up e-cigarettes, there's a slide, and I can actually probably click it. Quick facts Can y'all see this?
Yes, ma'am.
Quick facts on the risk of e-cigarettes for kids, teens, and young adults. And excuse me, when you go to like multimedia and tools, this has some of the different things that you can find for like different resources that are available. Another one was through the FDA. Let's see. This is one of the new campaigns by the FDA, the real cost. And it also goes into like prevention plans. Let's see. And so those I think would be the best resources to use, just because they have more information on the actual studies that have been completed, and they have a lot of the statistics and research for, you know, what works better, what they found to work better in the different schools.
Are there any additional questions, you guys? Also, for easy access, I have placed those 2 websites that Dr. Tillery just reviewed on the screen in the chat box for you guys to easily and quickly access it. Are there any additional questions? Okay, well, just to kind of wrap up some things, this session was recorded, so you can just come back to this exact link. It's not a new link. You won't receive a new email. Come back to this link and you will be able to review the recording at your leisure. It will be here for eternity, so you don't have to worry about it being removed or taken down or deleted. Please be sure that you guys complete the session evaluation. That link can be found on the agenda that was emailed out to everyone. If you guys don't have any additional questions, have a blessed day. Dr. Tillery, thank you for your wealth of knowledge. You are amazing. We've all learned something about vaping and the harms that come with it. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Y'all have a good day.